Hello everyone, my name is Aaron Donaldson and I'm a Customer Success Technical Leader here at Cisco. In this overview video, we're going to be talking about the basic syntax of the Jinja Templating language in Catalyst Center. So what is Jinja? Well, Jinja is a templating language that was written in the Python programming language. So as you use it, you'll notice that it's very similar to the Python programming language. It's essentially just a plain text markup language, and very similar to XML or even Markdown that you might be familiar with. What it does is it combines plain text with variables and also optionally some basic scripting logic, and it's used to generate text output. It was originally designed for dynamically generating HTML web pages, but it has expanded in use beyond that in recent years. And it's become very popular, probably the most popular templating language, and you'll find it in many other tools that you might be familiar with, such as Ansible or Flask or even the Django web application framework. So the most basic element of the Jinja templating language are its delimiters, and these are used to separate plain text from the Jinja markup language itself. The first delimiter is for statements, and these are used to define programming logic within your Jinja template. They are delimited by an opening and a closing set of curly braces and a percent symbol. So this goes around the content of your statement. And an example of this would be explicitly setting the value of a variable, for instance, or in an if-else conditional statement, we would surround our if and our else statements and then the end if closing tag in these statement delimiters. The next option here, the next delimiter, is called an expression. And this is used for surrounding variable names, and it prints out the output of the variable to the text output of the template. Now these are surrounded by a pair of curly braces both before and after the variable name. So an example here would be after we've explicitly set a variable to a value, we could print out the value that's stored in that variable, and this is the output we would get. The final delimiter is for comments, and comments are not printed to the output, but they are used for adding additional context and information into your template. So they are delimited by an opening and closing set of a curly brace and a pound symbol. And an example here would be within your template, you can add comments, as many as you like, anywhere in order to give additional information, but they will not print to the output. So there are some special cases for syntax in Jinja, and there are actually lots of special cases, but the most important ones that you may encounter are, first, escaping. There may be situations where you need to include special reserved characters in the text output of your template for some reason. And if you find yourself in a situation where you need to do that, you have two options. You can either escape the special characters in line with your text, or you can escape them using an entire block, what we call a raw block. So in the first example, in line, let's say that you have a string of text that happens to contain the curly brace and the percent symbol in the middle of that string. As Jinja is going through and processing this string, it's going to see these symbols and know that they're really meant to be the opening delimiters for a statement, and that might cause problems. So if you run into this situation, inside that string of text, you can surround those special characters with a double set of curly braces before and after, and then inside, you simply put quotation marks around those special characters, and then they'll be treated as plain text. If instead you have multiple lines that you want to escape, you can simply use the opening raw block and then the closing end raw tag that goes at the end, and you can escape multiple lines of text. The next option is white space control. Now, Jinja allows you some ability to control how it handles white space as it prints out the output of the template. This is where it either renders new lines or just additional white space. By adding a dash after the opening of a statement tag, you can tell Jinja to remove one preceding line of white space, so one line of white space that would have printed out above that statement. And by adding a dash at the end, right before the ending delimiter for a statement, you can tell it to remove one trailing line of white space. And there's very few scenarios where you would do this, but we'll talk about one in comments in just a moment. So as a bonus, if you used the dash at the end of a for loop, if you have a for loop in your template, and you put a dash right after the opening delimiter for the end for statement at the end of your for loop, this will tell Jinja to not print a carriage return at the end of each iteration of the loop. Normally, if you were looping through something, every iteration would print on a new line. And if for some reason you wanted all of the output to print on one single line, if you used this syntax in a for loop, it would print everything on one line until it was finished. Now the final example here are multi-line comments. Each comment in Jinja will cause a line of white space to be printed out. And while the content of the comment is not actually printed to the output, it does cause a blank line in the output of your template. And normally that's not a problem, but suppose you had multiple comments, like maybe 5 or 10 of them that you wanted to add to your template. Having 5 or 10 blank lines of space might be troublesome. So in order to control that, we can actually surround multiple lines of comments in just a single set of comment delimiters. So we put the delimiter before to open the comment and the delimiter after to close it, and we can have as many lines as we want in between. Jinja will treat this as just a single line comment. Jinja also supports several control structures, which is the syntax that tells Jinja to perform some kind of logical operation. Now, the most common control structures that you will run into or use in your templates are the if-else statement, and this allows you to perform comparison tests on variable values or other text values, and then take different actions based on the outcome of each of those tests. So in this if example, we could set up an if statement and have a variable named this, and we could evaluate, is it equal to, is the value stored in it equal to the text string that? And if it is, then the Jinja template would print out the line of text below it, or however many lines of text. Or even if there was another if statement in here, it would execute that. However, if this evaluates false, it will move on to the next conditional statement. This is the else if, and we can have 0 or more else if statements. As a matter of fact, the only required statement in an if-else statement, the only required line is the opening if and then the end if tag. We don't actually have to have anything else inside. But if we have additional conditions we want to check for, we can have 1 or 2 or 10 else if statements if we like, and they'll perform the same actions. So in this case, we're evaluating, is the variable this greater than the integer 99? So if this was equal to 100 or more, it would print out this line here, do something else. And finally, again, this is optional, we can have a catch-all else tag near the end, or an else statement. And this will only be triggered if all the previous statements evaluate false. So this is like a last resort ditch effort of doing something at the end of the if statement. The next option is for loops. So for loops are used to iterate over large data sets and perform some action for each item that's contained in that data set. And I say data set, but really we're talking usually about Python lists or arrays of some type. So we can set up a for loop, and we can say for each item, and this is a variable named item. We just made this up. You can choose any variable name that you want because it's only significant inside the for loop. But we're going to loop through every item in a list called list. And for every item that we find, we're going to store it in the variable named item. And then inside the loop, we can do something with it. So in this case, we'll have it print out the line do this, and then print another line, maybe even use an if statement. And inside this for loop, we can actually have an if statement to perform some evaluation. We can check to see, is the value stored in item equal to the string this? And if it is, we could have it print the line do something else. And when we're done, we use the end for tag. Now there's an important note here regarding security settings that are baked into the Jinja templating language. And this has to do with variable scope. It's a little hard to explain, but if we had a template and at the very top we explicitly set the value of a variable at the global level, and then later on down in the template we wanted to reference that variable inside of a for loop. Say we had a global variable named hello, and it was set to something. And we're inside of a for loop, and maybe we want to try and change the value stored in hello. We can attempt to do that in the for loop, and it would actually, within the for loop, it would actually change, and hello could be whatever we set it to. But as soon as we exit out of the for loop, the value for the variable named hello will remain what it used to be. Basically, the scope for variables used inside a for loop cannot extend outside the for loop, and this is just a data security thing that's baked in. So that's something to remember. If you're running through a for loop and taking some actions, just know that you cannot directly edit variables outside the for loop. And finally, we have the concept of a filter. So filters in Jinja allow you to transform the values of a variable as they're generated during output. And that's an important distinction to make. Filters do not actually change the value of a variable. The value stored in the variable will always remain the same. What they're doing is they're receiving the content of the variable, its output, and then they're performing some transformation on it. So this is really good for transforming or altering text. And there are tons of filters, but some common ones here that I'm showing are editing text strings. So if we have a variable named this, and we set it to the value, the string value, hello or space world, the next step we're going to take here is just print out the value of that variable. And it will be hello world with a space and lowercase letters. Now the next step is that we'll take the value stored in this, and we will send it to a filter called title. And title just renders text as title case, so every individual word gets capitalized. When we print that out, it's going to have hello world, but the H and the W will be capitalized. The next example here is a string replacement filter. So it searches for some string, some substring within whatever value you pass to it. And if it finds it, it will replace it with something else. So in this case, we're going to take the string hello world, we're going to search for the word hello, and we'll replace it with goodbye. And that will print out the string goodbye world. And then as a final step here, just to validate that we never actually changed what was stored in this, we'll print out that variable again, and we'll see that the value remains hello world with no capital letters. So next we're going to talk about some special keywords that Catalyst Center has for Jinja templates for taking certain actions. And now these are specific to Catalyst Center. They're not part of the Jinja templating language, and in fact they work in both Jinja and in Velocity. But these are special keywords that are programmed into Catalyst Center's templating engine, and they tell it to take certain special actions. The first example is enable mode. So whenever a template is generating output, the output from that template is going to be commands that are run on a device. And Catalyst Center considers every one of those commands to be run in global config mode. So if you were on the command line of a switch, for instance, this would be in the config terminal prompt. And all the commands that the template contains would be run in that config terminal prompt. But we know that some commands actually need to be run at the enable mode. And in those scenarios, what we can do is surround those special commands in our template with these special keyword tags called mode_enable. And then at the end of those commands, we'll use mode_end_enable. And both of those are preceded with a pound symbol. And this is telling Catalyst Center that as it's executing those commands, it should exit out of global config mode and back into the enable mode in order to run those commands. The next option here is interactive mode. Now, in some rare scenarios, we have commands that will provide you with an interactive prompt that you have to respond to before that command actually executes. And this usually happens in cases where the command might make some catastrophic change if you're not careful. So what we have is an option to search for a response being sent back to us, or a prompt being sent back on the command line, and to take some action if that prompt or that interactive prompt is found. So here we'll add around that interactive command the tags $interactive, and then at the end ends_interactive. And within those tags, we'll write out our command that will generate that interactive prompt, and then we'll follow it immediately by a set of caret symbols here with the capital letters IQ in the middle. So this is much like an XML tag. And this interactive query or interactive question is going to be followed by a string, and this can be part of the response that we would see, or a prompt that would come back, or it could be the entire prompt. But it's going to be looking for this string to show up in that interactive prompt that is sent back. And if it finds it, so in this example, maybe our interactive prompt contains the options yes/no. If it finds that string and recognizes it, then we'll follow that with an R tag here that's contained inside of caret symbols. It's a capital R. And this will be the response that we want Catalyst Center to send when that interactive prompt is triggered. So here we would tell it to run the command yes, or to respond with yes. Another option here is sometimes we have multi-line commands, commands that aren't just run on one single line. And the best example of this would be, for instance, the message of the day prompt in iOS XE. So if you have a command that requires multiple lines and a carriage return at the end of each one of those lines, we can begin and end this with this mlt_cmd tag, and this is exactly like XML. And at the very end, we have a closing tag that contains mlt_cmd, but preceded with a /, exactly like XML. Now, it's very important to note that the opening tag needs to be in line with the first line of your multi-line command, and the closing tag needs to be in line as the very last part of your last line of your command. So those have to be in line. They can't be above or below your multi-line command. The next option here is for saving config, and this is actually exactly like enable mode, but it's for a specific purpose. When you deploy templates in Catalyst Center from the web user interface, there is an option to save the configuration after the template is deployed. However, when you deploy a template using the API, that action doesn't normally happen implicitly. So in those scenarios, if you happen to be using our APIs to deploy a template, you will need to make sure that you save the configuration on the device at the very end. And to do that, we can simply tell it to run the enable mode command, either write memory or copy run start, and have this at the very end of your template, so it's the last command that gets executed. And finally, the last special keyword here is for ignore compliance. Now, there are some commands that may always cause compliance alerts in Catalyst Center, and a good example of this would be commands that contain a plain text password that are in your template, but then when that command is saved into the device, it actually gets encrypted and turned into a hash. So the hash will never match the plain text of the password. And these types of scenarios can cause a compliance alert because what you deployed will never match what's on the device in production. If you have those types of scenarios, you can surround one or more commands with these special tags for ignoring compliance. So we have to make sure that the syntax is correct here. They start with an exclamation mark followed by a space and then the @ symbol. And the opening tag is start-ignore-compliance. And at the very end, we use the same syntax, but this time the tag is end-ignore-compliance. And these tags simply tell our compliance engine to ignore anything in between those tags and not check to see whether it matches what was originally stored when it was deployed to the device. All right, so this concludes our overview of the Jinja templating language and the basic syntax. If you'd like to learn more, you can visit our YouTube channel where we have many other videos on other topics. I also have some links to documentation here, the first of which is the Catalyst Center user guide and specifically the chapter on CLI templating. The next is the online documentation for the Jinja templating language, and this contains all of the information about the options available in it. Just know that not every option that is programmed into Jinja is available and works in Catalyst Center. So there are some basic things that do work, but there are other advanced things that do not work. And finally, there are two written tutorials on Cisco U that cover advanced Jinja templating, and I actually wrote these tutorials and published them a few years ago. And as a matter of fact, this series on Jinja templating is being created based on the content that I wrote in these tutorials. These two are free to anyone with a Cisco U user account. It does not require a subscription, so these are always free to anyone with an account. And if you'd like to go way into depth in the advanced use cases and examples of the Jinja templating language, you can check out these two tutorials for free. So that concludes our overview video. Thanks for watching.